The morning coffee hadn't even cooled down when Sarah Martinez opened her mailbox and found something completely unexpected: a check from the United States Treasury for $2,500. She stood there on her suburban driveway, staring at the paper in disbelief, wondering if this was some elaborate scam. But it wasn't. The check was real, legitimate, and according to the letter attached, she had been entitled to this money for years without even knowing it. Here's what's actually going on, and why you need to pay attention right now, because time is running out. The Internal Revenue Service has identified a massive pool of unclaimed money that belongs to American taxpayers. Money that should have been in people's pockets years ago, but got lost in the bureaucratic shuffle of tax codes, stimulus programs, and economic relief packages that rolled out during some of the most chaotic years our country has faced. We're talking about real money, not some theoretical credit or future deduction, but actual checks being printed and mailed right now to addresses across all 50 states. The amount varies from person to person, but the average payout is hovering around $2,500, and for some families, particularly those with children or specific income situations from previous tax years, the amount can climb even higher. This isn't about stimulus checks from last year or tax refunds you already received. This is different. This is older money tied to credits and programs that many people either didn't know existed or thought they weren't eligible for because the eligibility requirements were so confusing that even tax professionals were scratching their heads. Think back to the economic impact payments, the recovery rebate credits, the child tax credit expansions, and various other programs that were rushed through Congress during emergency sessions. The implementation was messy, the communication was poor, and millions of people fell through the cracks. Now the IRS has finally caught up with its own backlog and has been cross-referencing tax returns, income records, and eligibility requirements. And what they've discovered is staggering. There are millions of Americans who never received money they were legally entitled to receive. Some people didn't file tax returns in certain years because their income was below the filing threshold, so they assumed they didn't qualify for anything. But that assumption was wrong. Others filed returns, but made small mistakes on specific forms or missed checking certain boxes that would have triggered automatic payments. Some people's checks were sent to old addresses and returned as undeliverable, and instead of the IRS making a serious effort to track these people down, the money just sat there in suspense accounts, waiting. What makes this situation even more urgent is that there are deadlines involved that most people don't know about. The IRS isn't going to chase you down forever, and for certain programs and tax years, there are statutory limitations on how long they're required to hold onto your money before it gets absorbed back into the general treasury. That means if you don't claim what's yours within a specific window, you could lose it forever, and that window is closing faster than you think. The Treasury Department has been sending out notices to people they believe are eligible, but here's the catch. They're only sending notices to addresses they have on file, and if that address is outdated, you'll never see the letter. Even worse, some of these notices look so much like junk mail or potential scams that people are throwing them away without even opening them, which is exactly what happened to Sarah Martinez's neighbor, who found his notice in the recycling bin just days before it would have been hauled away. So how do you know if you're on the list? There are specific indicators that suggest you might be owed this money, and you need to check them right now, because every day that passes is a day closer to these funds disappearing. First, if you didn't file a tax return in 2020 or 2021 because your income was low or you were unemployed, you might have missed out on recovery rebate credits that were worth hundreds or even thousands of dollars per person. Second, if you had a child born or adopted during those years and didn't claim the expanded child tax credit, there's money waiting for you. Third, if you received unemployment benefits and paid taxes on them before the rules changed to exempt the first $10,000, you're probably owed a refund that was supposed to be automatic but somehow never arrived. Fourth, if you moved during this period and didn't update your address with the IRS through proper channels, your check could have been sent somewhere you no longer live. The process to claim this money isn't as complicated as you might fear, but it does require action on your part. And that's where most people get stuck. because we've all been trained to be suspicious of anything involving the IRS or government payments, especially with so many scams floating around. The legitimate way to check your status is to access your IRS account online through their official website, where you can see your payment history and any outstanding credits or refunds you're owed. If you don't have an online account, you'll need to create one, which requires identity verification that can take a few days to process, so don't wait until the last minute. Alternatively, you can call the IRS directly. They'll be prepared for long wait times because their phone lines are constantly overwhelmed with people asking these exact questions. What's really infuriating about this entire situation is that it shouldn't be this hard in the first place, because we live in an age where technology can track every purchase you make, every website you visit, and every message you send. Yet somehow the federal government can't figure out how to automatically send people money they're legally entitled to without requiring them to jump through bureaucratic hoops and file amended returns for tax years that feel like ancient history. Other countries have figured this out. Places like the United Kingdom and several Scandinavian nations have systems where the government calculates what you owe or what they owe you and handles it automatically without requiring average citizens to become amateur accountants. But here in America, we've built a tax system so intentionally complex that entire industries exist just to help people navigate it. And even then, billions of dollars in legitimate payments get lost in the shuffle every single year. The demographics of who's missing out on this money are particularly troubling when you dig into the data. It's not wealthy people with teams of accountants who are losing track of $2,500 checks. Those folks have professionals who catch every penny. The people missing out are overwhelmingly lower-income workers, elderly citizens on fixed incomes, young adults filing taxes for the first time, immigrants navigating an unfamiliar system, people experiencing homelessness or housing instability, and families going through major life disruptions like divorce, death of a spouse, or medical emergencies. These are exactly the people who need this money most desperately, and they're the ones least likely to have the resources, time, or knowledge to fight through the bureaucracy to claim it. It's a system that accidentally, or perhaps not so accidentally, punishes the vulnerable while protecting the privileged. Take the case of Robert Chen, a 68-year-old retiree living in Arizona who spent his entire career as a machinist before his company downsized and eliminated his position 3 years before he planned to retire. Robert's income dropped dramatically during 2020 and 2021 as he cycled through part-time work and unemployment benefits, trying to make ends meet until he could claim Social Security. He filed simple tax returns those years, just reporting his unemployment and occasional W-2 income, never realizing he was eligible for economic impact payments he never received and recovery rebate credits he never claimed. When he finally heard about the unclaimed money through a news segment that aired on his local television station, he checked his IRS account and discovered he was owed $3,400. That money represented nearly 3 months of his current Social Security income, and it could have helped him avoid maxing out his credit cards during those desperate years. Or consider the situation of Jennifer and Marcus Thompson, a young couple in Michigan with 3 kids under the age of 7. During the chaos of 2020, Jennifer was furloughed from her job at a hotel that eventually closed permanently, while Marcus continued working reduced hours at a warehouse. They received the first 2 stimulus payments without issue, but somehow the third one never arrived, and with 3 young children, endless Zoom school disasters, and the stress of trying to keep their mortgage paid, they simply didn't have the bandwidth to chase down a missing government check. They assumed it was lost in the mail or that maybe they weren't eligible for some reason they didn't understand. 2 years later, they're still living paycheck to paycheck, and that missing payment, which should have been $4,200 for their family of 5, would have prevented them from falling behind on their car payment and damaging their credit score, something that's now making it harder for them to refinance their mortgage at a better rate. These aren't isolated stories. They're representative of millions of Americans who are owed this money but don't know it or don't know how to claim it. The IRS estimates that there are potentially 8 to 12 million people in this situation, though the exact number is hard to pin down because their records are incomplete and their systems don't talk to each other efficiently. What we do know is that there are currently over $4 billion in unclaimed payments sitting in government accounts, money that belongs to regular people who earned it through their tax situations and life circumstances. Yet it remains out of reach because the claiming process is neither automatic nor particularly well advertised. The timeline for claiming this money is critical and varies depending on which specific payment or credit you're trying to recover. For recovery rebate credits related to 2020, you generally have until April of 2024 to file or amend your return to claim them. But if you're reading this now in late 2025, that deadline has already passed for some categories. For 2021 credits, the deadline extends further, but not indefinitely. The IRS operates under a 3-year rule for most refunds, meaning you have 3 years from the original due date of the return to claim money owed to you, after which point the government is no longer legally obligated to pay it out. This means that as we move deeper into 2025, windows are closing on older, unclaimed amounts, and once those windows shut, the money doesn't just disappear into thin air, it gets reclassified and absorbed back into general government revenue, essentially becoming a windfall for the Treasury Department funded by people who were too confused, too busy, or too uninformed to claim what was rightfully theirs. The psychological barrier is real too, because many people have developed such deep distrust of anything involving the IRS that they assume any notice or opportunity related to government payments must be a scam. And honestly, can you blame them? The scam industry has so thoroughly poisoned the well that when legitimate opportunities arise, people's first instinct is to delete, ignore, or throw away anything that looks remotely official. This creates a perfect storm where the government sends out real notices about real money, but recipients assume it's fraud and take no action. Then later discover they missed out on thousands of dollars because they were trying to protect themselves from criminals.